Okay, everything works. Does your sound work?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Perfect. Now you are here. Amazing. So I guess you can mute yourself and do your own thing until 4:50. All good. Thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me? Oh, all right.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Sweet.
Amazing.
Cool.
Infinite Theater's Playwrights Chat Room once again with you on a Thursday afternoon, evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Guy Sprung. I'm the outgoing artistic director at Infinite Theater, and Zach Fraser is the incoming one. He's at the moment, he is directing Paul Van Dyk's play King of Canada. We hope to open it live at the Kin Studio in Café des Spectacles on October the 20th. We'll see, as long as we don't go to red, we can do that live. So that's Infinite Theater actually kickstarting live theater again. But in the meantime, we have had a series of playwright chat rooms discussing plays in early drafts. And today we are going to talk Zaynab Bourezza's play Mein Volk. Now, if I got the pronunciation wrong, we'll hear of that in a moment. The actual orthography of the play is a little bit unique. So as I say, it's open to possible getting the pronunciation wrong. So very quickly then, I'm going to introduce Zaynab. Zaynab, welcome. Thank you very much for allowing us to talk about your play. It is unique. It's a pretty crazy format. There are a lot of questions. We've had a few people write some remarks in, which I'll at some point quote from. But so we'll probably all of us try and rewrite your play for you, and you of course will go ahead and write it the way you want it. But with a bit of luck, some of our suggestions, some of our ideas might be stimulating for you. We found, in fact, in the past, this is now our 5 and 3, this is our 9th chat room. The playwrights actually have been really happy. They have all walked away with suggestions that they feel has really helped them for the next draft. So with a bit of luck, we'll be able to do that for you. Zaynab, you are a writer and a screenwriter, and you have a BA in creative writing at the Université de Montréal. Is that right? Okay, and this play, and we'll hear about that, was workshopped at Tisri Dunya Theater, whose motto, and I love it, changing the world one play at the time. I love that for a motto mandate for a theater. And so they have a fireworks script development program. And so we're lucky here that we have Quinn, Quinlan Green. Quinlan, welcome, thank you. You actually directed the workshop that at Tisri Dunya, and we'll get back to you and ask you about that. But you're a writer, and yourself a director. You're actually from BC, but you have seen the light and you have come to Montreal, and and you're now in a class in theater course at Concordia. So we'll ask you, actually, I'd love to know how that is. We'll get back to you in a second on that. Vishesh Abhiratne. Vishesh is a playwright, and actually your play Divide and Rule was the runner-up last year in our Right on Cue playwriting competition. So I hope you spent the proceeds well on that. And you also, and I'm not totally talking out of turn here, you submitted another play to this year. And so I'm I can bear the happy news that your play was one of the finalists. So you will be going to the jury as one of the finalists. So congrats on that. This year, for the first time, the jury actually will know whose play they're reading. They're not going in anonymously. So that is why I can actually, I can let you in on this. I'm not giving any secrets away to any hidden jury members out there in internet land. Anyway, congrats. It was a really nice play, by the way, but I'm not allowed to comment. That I'm not allowed to do. So, also we have Gilda. Montreal. Gilda, you're an actress, filmmaker, writer in your own right, a member of an arts collective, and you were an actress in the workshop production of Mindfolk. So looking forward to hearing how that felt like as an actress from the inside. And lastly, we have Lydia Dubuisson. Lydia, thank you for slipping out and doing this from your time at the Seagull. Lydia, you're a theater creator, playwright, director yourself. You actually graduated from, I guess, the same program that Quinn is taking at the moment. So
my program died, actually. TDEV is gone, apparently, officially from Concordia, but yes, with playwriting, indeed.
Okay, all right. And you are now running the fireworks program for Tisri Dunya.
Well, I am working with Deborah Ford still, but we are still in discussion of passing the flame. But yeah, I've been working with Tisri closely lately, and our relationship is getting closer. And I was part of the panel when we did the first reading for this play. So it was very interesting to read. I don't know, Zaynab, if that was draft 1 that I had back last spring, but yes, and now this new version. So yeah.
I'm going to ask you at some point maybe to tell us a bit more about how fireworks work, but let's Zaynab, let's go to your play. Do you mind giving us a little bit of a mise en scène for it? We're inside somebody's head. What is actually going on?
I started writing it maybe, I think 2 years ago. I was at the Black Theater Workshop working on a play for the Artist Mentorship Program.
Yeah.
And I was stuck on that project, and our mentor, I think it was Marie Barlizo, if I remember, she had an exercise for us, and that's when I wrote the first scene for Mindfuck, and I just let it marinate, and I thought I should find a program maybe specifically for playwrights, so I would have many writers commenting on it, and that would help me develop the play. So yeah, I was stuck, and I wrote a play about being stuck.
Okay, so it's the writer's block is actually a character, or at least an image or an object, and it comes into the play itself. Is there you broke we're inside the mind of this writer, and you broke the characters down into colors. Did you? I mean, help me there. How does the character? How does a mind break down into different voices?
At first, I named them like in Snow White, but it was confusing, and I thought the colors are pretty good for. I don't need to explain it. When you see red, it's passion. When you gray, it's like age, knowledge. Blue, I'm feeling blue, a little depressed. I thought the colors it would click instantly, maybe in the brain of people by just seeing the colors for the characters.
Okay, is that breakdown? Does anybody want to jump in on that? How did when you read, what part did you actually read in the workshop, Gilda?
So I'm having technical difficulties with my video, but my audio is fine. I hope you guys can hear me. Smooth.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay, good. So I'll just keep talking. So I have a part of Blue in the workshop. It was interesting because prior to the workshop, Blue had designated one of the opening monologues, which when we jumped into the rehearsal right before it was screened, that monologue went to Red, which in the end made more sense. But when I pre-read it as a monologue for Blue, Blue became a multi-layered, more complex character. And once that monologue was given back to Red, Blue seemed to fall more into a linear space. Perhaps the stereotype of Blue and depression or reserved isolation. And so I think my experience with the reading was I actually had to quickly fall into that other more linear character, whereas my mind had already started searching for the complexity of a different character. So I think it was interesting. It was an interesting journey.
But your character, sorry, the Blue character is suicidal. Why is that? And maybe that's a question to Zaynab. How does that come from? Is that just the part of all of us that basically wants to throw in the towel and when we're faced with a challenge? How did you see the Blue's? It's like in the constant reliving. You die and you come back to life again. Persephone or I don't know, a perennial plant or whatever. But what did you understand the suicide to be?
Is that
Just
a question for
having
me or more for Zaynab?
Okay, well, let's ask Zaynab.
For me, it was just dealing with depression. Like it just keeps coming back.
Quinn, did you feel the characters? How different were the characters? Do they break down in a kind of logical way for you?
I think, yeah, logical is actually a really great way to put it, because that's sort of how I was, especially like re-encountering the script now, having done the workshop in July. But definitely, I think it's like they do fall into like what we were talking about. I think stereotype is like a word. The way that and I think Zaynab articulated it great, was like how the colors sort of like match up to the immediate like understanding of these personalities. And I think they do definitely this kind of internal logic, which is really great because the play is like, it does so many things and the space is so abstracted that it's kind of nice to have these three stones to be like, right, Red is the passionate one, Blue is the more melancholy one, and so forth. Yeah, and I find it fascinating, Gilda, like remembering we did have this switch up in the script about the monologue at the beginning, and it's Red, who's this very like feisty, creative writer character, expressing how disaffected they are, and originally thinking that was Blue. I'm remembering that now, having heard Gilda mention that, and that does sort of speak to the fact that these characters kind of can be almost in the same, like they have the same kind of source. They're supposed to be the characters in this one person's head, right? Yeah. But they're also like very different. And so that obviously switching it back to Red sort of gives it more in line with Red being the feistier one and Blue being the more melancholic one. But definitely is interesting to sort of think about how these personalities overlap, especially for the actors working on it, having the time to sort of consider their perspective of their scene partners, because they all do get in sort of this fight over the course of the play, but using as an exercise almost even like, what if you gave the monologue that's very specifically the gray one's monologue and gave that to Blue, or switching that around? It's an idea that I just came up with now, but I think it's sort of speaks to the way that these characters all speak to each other. And I think that that's sort of the thing that kind of holds this together is to say like the logic again of these different characters and how their personalities work and clash and then come together in one piece. I think it's very interesting as far as the character study of this piece goes.
I also think it would be interesting to have to look, maybe research or see multi-layers and the complexity of somebody that does go through depression and leads to suicide, because that does seem to be one of the endpoints of the story, where she, the character Blue, does commit suicide. And so what is the build up to that point? And the other characters also talk about how she attempts this many times. Is there a build up to this? What does it mean to be depressed? And what are the characteristics of something that go beyond the expected? Or what are the dimensions of depression? Like, what can that look like? Because I think Blue plays this kind of supporting role with one-lines. And at the beginning, it's kind of removed, or resignation. And I found that throughout the play, it's kind of one-liners that are funny almost. They kind of like, I don't know if funny, but it's almost one-liners. And it would be interesting to see how that depression and suicide element evolves and how that buildup happens.
Vishesh, I'm just going to read you here the synopsis as Zaynab gave it to us, and just ask you if you feel this is the play that you read. So, to stay alive, different sides of a writer must unite to write the masterpiece. They're stuck in that cramped up place between that person's ears and forced to face themselves. Denial is the weighted blanket from hell. Isn't being a self-saboteur the biggest mindfuck of them all? How do you get out of it? Is that what an adequate synopsis? Is that the play you read, you think?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. Both times I read this play, I found that it became pretty clear that all of these characters, all of these different facets of this one person's mind are kind of, they're stuck in their own personal hell. It's very Godot-like in that way. It did make me wonder, actually, because there are suggestions throughout the text of these personalities being constantly rebooted, and I was curious to know a little bit more about the logistics behind the mechanisms of this system. How many times have they been rebooted, and do any of these reboots, do any of their past selves inform their present selves at all, underneath all the different times that they've been reincarnated, as it were? I don't know if that makes any sense, but
yeah. Zaynab, how do you what do you think about that question?
They keep being rebooted, but it never works. Blue and Red never remember, but they keep the same personality. Gray is the one who remembers everything, every reboot.
Right, because she's the system's, I forget what the term was for it in the play, but kind of like their memory bank in a sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And who is then the Almighty? Who is that external, the almighty mind? You call him the program on autopilot, the housekeeper you don't want. But how does that work with someone who's trying to write a masterpiece?
I'm still working on that, but I have to look into AI. I would like to integrate it more. It's kind of like the person. It's like the person is passive, and everything's happening in their mind, and I don't know if that's clear.
It certainly works that it's in their mind. I just didn't know who the almighty mind was in that structural breakdown. I was confused as to the overall structure of the piece. And you say in the synopsis they're writing the masterpiece. there's a mention of hours at the very end. The 24 hours is there, but the first mention is we've got 20 hours left, and then there's other, you know, the timeline is shrinking as we go through the play. What is it that are they, you know, in a 24-hour novel contest? What is the big picture of why do they have to write the masterpiece? What is this?
As a writer, sometimes I feel like you want to give up, but you're like, no, you know what? Let me have one more try before I try to get a real job in the real world. Or yeah, it's kind of like that. Maybe I should make it clear.
So what you're saying is the writer, the person, the outside person has given themselves 24 hours to write something to prove that in fact they're a writer. Is that it?
Yep.
Okay. I didn't get that from that big picture. Lydia, did you feel that that was the overall structure?
I don't feel like I'm afraid of sharing, but I felt very exposed with this play. Maybe it's because I'm a Virgo. I identify with having all of these voices talking in your head and like figuring out, are you going to act, or are you just going to find the perfect solution and stay into that hole of conversation in your head? And until you figure it out, to me, that's how I interpreted the reboot of like an almighty mind being like, did you figure it out or not? And is your brain just going to like decide to go lazy on another direction because you didn't figure out how to write the new Romeo and Juliet? You didn't. So it's, I thought it was fascinating. I think part of me has been waiting for a play like this for a while, and then they made a cartoon of it, made it and out, but it didn't really answer my own cravings. But I, like the writer's anxiety, if you are a writer and you do have that sort of anxiety, reading to me the script was very, it felt like maybe it's my director brain also that's taking over. But I did put label on like writer's block, on almighty mind, and how they all feed into, are you, especially like even Zaynab, as you were saying, like about finding a real job, and what is that real job? And if that, so is it about that person accepting their real personality and just going with all of them working together, or they're just going to stay scattered and never become one? Anyways, so to me, it felt like the turmoil that someone goes through when they're blocked. It's a hole. You're turning in a circle, and the when they all end up with pink little wigs and all of a sudden like everything is okay, it's kind of, I feel like in the end, like there's a major breakdown. Is it the breakdown that's going to change everything for that playwright? So they're going for it, or is it the breakdown that's going to make them go to the real job? It's an inner fight. So I guess to me, it felt rich of a lot of things that can be expressed with those words. But then again, my brain goes from playwright to director every now and then. It depends on how you read it, I guess.
But I think pretty well everybody here, myself included, has in some way dabbled in writing. So I think you're right. I think we all know those moments of anxiety. Did anybody feel that they needed to know more what was being written about, or do you know what I mean? What the writer was going to write about or take on? I mean, there are indications of the politics of the person whose brain we're in. I mean, I love the sections where it almost becomes a Peter Handke play, you know, that old 1960s play, offending the audience, where the actors just sit and shout down the audience and talk them down, and you have sections that are very similar like that in it. So you get a sense of what the politics of the person whose head we're in are, but I don't know what he or she is going to write about, and you know, and how do they tackle it? How do they do it? Did anybody else feel, or is that just me being slightly anal here?
I was curious.
Yeah.
I was curious to know what it was about, and what they were trying to create and achieve, because particularly because their motivations behind doing this, even though they're programs, neurons, electrical signals in the brain, all of their motivations are incredibly human. You know, from Red's desire to incite revolution and tear everything down to, you know, Gray being motivated by survival. You know, how are we is this gonna help us pay the bills? Is this gonna help us pay rent and keep the electricity on? And yeah, I guess it just those exchanges that they had in particular drew me in and made me want to know, okay, what is this thing about? What is this thing that they're trying to make? What do they see it as? Because we know what they want. We know what they want it to be, but how do they see it? How do they picture it?
Right. Quinn, were you going to jump in on that?
Yeah, I can definitely. It's interesting that we're talking about what the writing is specifically. I remember reading the draft for the workshop that we did and thinking at one point, and it's funny to keep going back to the sort of suicidal motivations, but thinking at one point that the end result was writing a suicide letter. And then, of course, it was great to hear from Zaynab that this wasn't entirely the case. It was sort of like the idea was just writing something to begin with, being the product that they're trying to go for. It's almost like beating your procrastination by just doing anything and hoping that that's sort of the truest thing that you can go for. And I think it is really interesting to bring up the relationship to like this person whose head we're inside, like their politics and what they're trying to accomplish. I think definitely for my peer group, and also like, you know, considering like Zaynab a part of that and really everyone here, but like I think the most relatable thing, or one of the most relatable things for this script, as far as how I consider my own generation or like the peers that I'm around who are also writing and are also trying to sort of like solve the issues that we're like looking at in the world and everything that's sort of come before us, is like, I think the peers that I have, you know, in theater and then also outside of theater, we all sort of have this drive, if our politics align and our, you know, we have the same interests, to sort of like speak to the issues that are going on in our world in politics and in the way that our countries are run and all of that, the way that capitalism works, the way that labor is expected, like those specific things. We all want to speak to that and we all want to find our ways to solve that, but it's very, like, it's so hard to find concrete solutions and to find that concrete writing and to find that paragraph that's going to, like, you know, save everyone, is speak your mind and be able to sort of put that into words, but also do it in concrete ways. And I think that's, so when I was reading this and wondering what they're doing, it's interesting that it never was a question for me, and maybe it should have been, to be honest, as a director, is like, what is this specific thing that you're writing? Because for me, so much of the play was about that uncertainty of like, well, what could it be? What could we possibly write as one person to solve all these things that are clearly making this person so anxious about capitalism and about being expected to work and make money and doing art for, you know, the higher classes and all of that. These are things that they, you know, state outright, or their anxieties about making art. So I don't know, like, it's interesting to bring up the specificity of what they're writing, because I do think it is important from a sort of given circumstances point of view. Like, of course, you want to know what is the end goal. Is it a 24-hour novel writing contest, or is it, you know, a personal manifesto or whatever? Like, that is very important. But I also think that the ambiguity of, like, it is three people in a room just being like, what are we supposed to write? Like, I think that's sort of what the question is for them as well, is that they don't know what they are writing. Or at least that's how I've encountered it. But yeah, so I think that that's a very interesting question to bring up there, because at first I was like, well, I don't really know what they're writing, but it doesn't matter for me. I'm just looking at these characters. But you're right in the fact that you have to sort of think about that as well. So.
In reading the two versions, the versions that you worked on, and then this new slightly adapted version, did you find any interesting changes? Were there anything that that struck you as you know, having been an interesting addition?
I know I loved seeing that there was the fourth color. So the one that we worked on was red, blue, and gray. And then I read the very start of the character breakdown. I was like, oh, there's indigo. So there's a fourth person now, which I thought was a really interesting addition. And so right off the bat, that was a fun, you know, sort of change up to the second half of the script that I hadn't read. I'm thinking about like the ending itself and watching the characters sort of come up against writer's block was all very, like, I loved reading that. I thought it was a great extension of what we'd already worked on in the summer. And I loved seeing Red and Gray having to work together. So Red being the more feisty one and Gray being the way more pragmatic and, you know, ordered one. I'm thinking about differences. It's funny because like I don't think the world changed too much for me. We'd already discussed what it sort of was, and it is this very ambiguous thing. So like in my mind, I had like, this is just Quinn Green taking this world, but I thought it was like, we talked about Inside Out. Also Westworld came up in our rehearsal, and I think that like those, like Inside Out meets Westworld meets like psychological sort of thriller. In my mind, I get pretty experimental with it. I'm thinking about like having a black box with, you know, like neon lights and like no one ever in one specific space. Like there's a lot of possibility in how you design this set and how you design this location that people could come to and sit. And I think that, it was only furthered by this second draft of the script where more things come in and break down and lights flicker.
I can see totally. I mean, this is the way this play is written. It's a kind of a director's wet dream, because you can imagine it in so many different ways. That's absolutely right. There was an interesting little addition to a stage direction that you added in this new version. They're inside the black box. There are cameras everywhere, like in a reality TV show. What is that? How you see the whole thing? It's a reality TV show inside your head.
Yeah, and it's a little the Big Brother. Someone's watching. Who is watching? We don't.
Okay.
I love it.
Does anybody have any other questions? I know I have a specific one. Why don't the bathrooms work? What does that mean?
I think at the end, it's like they're full of it because the bathroom's not working. But it's like, why is it not working? Is it the AI that is sabotaging them?
Right.
Yeah.
But okay, so they're full of
yes.
Are you putting your own characters down then?
So I'm putting myself down to, yes. Yeah.
All right. What does it mean when they leave the room?
It's when you leave the room, you're like you're in charge of the person.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That was not clear.
Did anybody catch that? That totally right over my head. Did anybody catch that?
So if Gray is out of the scene, it's because Gray is actually in control and working.
Yeah.
The work.
Okay. Did anybody else see that?
I also did not. I wasn't able to guess that, but now that I hear it, I definitely think that ties a lot of things together. I wonder if there's ways that could be
Well, except for Gray. For Gray, it felt clear that Gray seemed to be the one in charge, and whenever Gray would come back. For me, it wasn't much about what is the person writing about. It was mainly what is the person's potential? How much do I want that person to write something? And I don't, right now, I'm just attached to a person who is confused and who really wants to do well. But at one point I did ask myself, but in spite of all the good opinions and so on, maybe they're a very bad writer. So it's, do they have a potential? Was there already something that is giving them the right to dream? Because sadly, part of me also wonders, like, everybody wants to create something big. So is that really the calling, or is this just a dream? And if there's a calling, is there a reason why does Red has a memory that says this is the reason why I should write? And if I don't make it, so it's mainly for me to be attached to how much do I want the character or the whole of them to write something more than what do they want to write.
Anybody got any thoughts on that? It seems to me that's a really central question. I think you put your finger right on it there, lady. In terms of our hope for that character, we want to know, if we know more, what they're writing, why they're writing it, and we want to be on their side to get it written. You know, then I think you have that would change the whole emotional structure of our relationship to the stage. I think if we were on the side of the writer because we really believed in them in some way. Is that sort of, if I got that, is that what you're saying, Liddy? Because I think it's what you've done, I think, Zaynab, is you've taken a structure, a really innovative structure, but I think you have, in doing so, you've lost some of the old, you know, things that would make a play work, you know, why are the scenes divided up as they are? I mean, if you've got a wee clo kind of situation, would it not be much more exciting if you could write it all in one piece so that it unravels naturally? To me, the moment you go to black, you've taken the tension out of what's going on inside that room. So that would be just one simple challenge I would throw to you structurally, would be, can you write the thing as one scene, one long scene, which, you know, evolves like that snowball coming down the hill, getting bigger and bigger and more dangerous as it rolls. But I also think that Liddy is really onto something there in terms of boy, would we like to be on the side of that writer, I think. In fact, it was what one of the comments that somebody wrote in was, I'd like to hear more about her struggles and compromises and how it may be harder for her due to her gender and her race to actually succeed as a writer. That sort of rung true to me. There was somebody wrote in, interesting, it's a great premise. It could use a conflicting character with the overall person in whose head we're residing. In other words, is there somebody outside of that's in opposition to this writer, somebody? Again, just looking for a fairly old-fashioned kind of tension in the story of some kind. Did you see anything interesting in the rewrite, Gilda? Anything that you wanted to comment on?
I actually had a question for Zaynab about the gender perspective, gender role, and what that played in the script overall. And I think the script is introduced with that, and you go into the play with that, and then I'm not sure if the intention or experience of gender was felt throughout the script, or how gender drives the character's experience. And there were 3 points in the script that explicitly referred to she or women. But there were 3 derogatory comments towards women. So one was the trophy wife, and 2 were the C word and the B word. And I wondered, it made me question what the intention with gender or perspective on gender was with the selected language used. Was there a different perspective or experience of this? Why was that language chosen? Why were those the only 3 specific gendered words chosen? How can gender drive the story forward? And then I guess to add to that, the aspect of women of color. So what is the experience of a woman of color in the story and as a writer? And you know, there are so many dimensions to that as well. And as a Latina writer, I have experienced, you know, the Spanglish spectrum or language spectrum, the phonetic spectrum of writing, the storytelling, the cultural experience of writing. Is it a generalized woman of color experience? Is there a specific woman of color experience? Like, what, maybe exploring that?
Did you want to answer that, Zaynab? Did you feel, is that of interest to you to try and get that more specific in the next draft?
Yeah, that's something I wanted to write about, but I wasn't sure when or where in the play. When they say like, oh, I'm gonna become a trophy wife, I feel like sometimes as a writer, when you're a woman, like you're not taken seriously, or you're thinking, you know, maybe I should, the way you appear might affect like the way you're received, but it doesn't matter because you're a woman anyway. Maybe for the next draft, I'm gonna develop more on that. I will.
It's again, yeah. Somebody just typed in that the ambiguity of what they want to write risks distancing us and nullifies the potential stakes to some extent. So again, that's just reinforcing, I think, what Liddy was on about, that that if we know more about the writer and care more, the stakes are raised, to use those traditional dramaturgical terms. and I think then there's more for us in the audience. I would also, you know, still some of the metaphors, you know, I'm not sure about. Why are the pipes defective in this place? What's the construction noise that drowns them out? Am I again asking for simplistic answers to these things? What is the construction noise that drowns red out at one point?
It's remodeling. They're at the beginning, I think they receive a letter that they're gonna be replaced. So this is kind of the last try before the writer decides to get a regular job. Or completely change his career. Yeah.
Okay, so the you're going to be replaced means we're going to give up writing.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't capture that was what was at stake, because that's a pretty big, you know, something at stake. Now, what about the ending? Does anybody want to come in about the ending? It's pretty. It doesn't paint a very fun picture of being a writer. Why would anybody want to be a writer if you had to sell your soul that hard?
I would love to talk about the ending, especially because the sort of the new ending, or the ending that is in this new draft that I've just read. I think it's like, I love the image just of like the sort of the three indigo, like blue and red, being in the pink wigs, which was sort of just like that was immediately just an image that caught my attention. But also Gray being the one to sort of take up the mantle of the leader and be suddenly so motivated was really interesting as well. And also, like, I'm bringing this up as what interests me, at least to start the conversation, because I was realizing as we were talking about Gray being the only person who remembers, you know, their reboot, and sort of having that accumulate on them. And it's just sort of like letting that work on me as I was hearing it, because it's thinking about, there's that part of the play where they show red, their wires on their skin. And there's sort of like, I was realizing just hearing that now, that it's sort of this sense of like accumulation that they get on their body of like the lives that they've lived, maybe, if that's what the intention is. So it was curious for me, because I was realizing at the end that Gray sort of takes on this newer, more determined, maybe in my mind, sort of like leadership of everyone else, who suddenly is just becoming very like, you know, malleable and with their pink wigs on, whatever that means. I'd love to hear more about what the pink wigs mean. But I also think it's interesting to see Gray in this sort of new light, and especially hearing that they keep remembering all the things that happened, whereas Red and Blue are a little bit more ignorant to the cycles that go on in this room. Definitely made Gray seem more of a complicated character to me than what I'd given them in the past. So I really liked the ending as far as how it characterized Gray as something sort of new for me in the very last page of the script. If that makes sense for.
Okay, we have another chat room participant, I see. That's great. Anybody else want to chime in on the ending?
I was wondering where there was a point where I was a little bit confused in reading the very last part. So do they take the contract? Does the reboot nullify the contract in its entirety? Do they decide that they're not gonna, does Gray decide that they're not gonna do it and simply start over? I guess I was sort of, I mean, I did get that sense of, you know, it's Sisyphus pushing the boulder up the hill again, and it's like, okay, here we, you know, the struggle continues to write to write something meaningful. But I was just sort of wondering where they stood in reference to this contract that was offered to them, especially since it comes up so late in the play.
I think in one part of the play, they're like, fuck the story, we're just gonna focus on saving ourselves. So when they break the bathroom and Gray, it's kind of like they're infiltrated by a virus, and Gray has to literally like kill the virus. She takes charge and she goes against the writer themselves, like the AI. Yeah.
Okay, just one last circle here. If you had one thing you would like Zaynab to include or change in the next draft, what would that be? Can I start with you, Liddy, on that? What would you suggest be added or changed in the next draft?
Added or changed? I trust Zaynab onto what she's going to add to it and so on. And no, I'm sorry, I'm having someone who's telling me that he wants to watch his walks. The only thing I would say, be careful about, because I read it before COVID. And when I started reading it again, I got very excited at how accurate a lot of it felt, because especially with what people went through during the spring and being stuck at home and being stuck with our brains. And I thought it was fantastic that you actually got into this before. And when it got specific with dates and words, the first time that I read the word COVID, I went like, oh, okay, so now it's been readapted and this is the writing that happened after what I read. And also, I think year 2020, but I do love the fact that you go in there with the CHSLD, that's how that was a boomer genocide and so on. I understand why you're going there, but I don't think you need to say COVID or 2020, just to not stick it in stone, because I think that whenever we read those plays, whatever happened, it feels alive. But when we put a label on it, it becomes, oh, and that's how you felt in 2020, when in fact we felt like this in 2019, and sadly, you know. So that would be the only thing, like, to be careful about giving dates that will set your play in stone, because it works well. It worked well before, and it just works better now. And yeah, that was my 2 cents.
Okay. That's great, actually, keeping it abstract. Vishesh, did you want to, one thought that you pass on to Zaynab for the next draft?
I would just say keep on, there's so much in this world that you've created that is so rich and vibrant and compelling and creative. And I mean, I love science fiction theater. It's very hard to write, and I think you've written something that's you've managed to take this form and create something very very unique indeed. So just look at every spot where you can enrich that, and I think the stakes and the characters will carry it through. Yeah, it's a wonderful piece of work.
Okay, very nice. Gilda?
Yes, I think other than the question of the gender and questioning that, I would echo Lydia's comments, because I actually had wondered if it was a period piece. And if it was a period piece about 2020, there are comments like Marie Kondo or references that are very contemporary. And the first time I read it, I think instinctually, in that fascinating, abstract, absurdist world, I loved that world that you put us in. And then when I started realizing that there were period references, I wondered if it was necessary, if that drove the story forward. If it does, is that the direction you want to take it in? Or if you remove those pieces, does the story still stand and that world still stand on its own? And that maybe one last comment. I also wondered, in between the dialogue, there are just the narration. There are at times where specific instructions are given to the actor, and I was wondering if that was something that could be left to explore between the director and the actor during rehearsals. So something that could perhaps drive a different action every time the actor rehearses a certain scene. And that was just a question that I would leave.
Okay, that's from an acting point of view. Okay. Quinn, did you have a last thought, or two, or three?
I mean, I'll try to keep it to one or two. Yeah, I definitely agree with what Lydia was saying. That was actually going to be my comment, just about the time placing, and it's a difficult sort of like seesaw thing with, like, do you want it to be super specific? And I agree that writing COVID just suddenly makes it something totally another thing these days. So I think that what Lydia had to say just articulated that perfectly, and I'll just leave that. But also, yeah, I think as far as the different characters go, and thinking about the actor-director relationship with this, is I think to go back to what we were talking about with sort of the character switching and the motivations, I think that they're very interesting characters on their own. And maybe selfishly, I'm just wondering how these characters might be also related to each other in very sort of precise ways that maybe show up once or twice. And that's something obviously that I think would have to be tested out with actors involved, like in the studio, is like the ways that they're related. And if you there's one monologue that has to be blues, well, what if you gave it to Gray? What does it just sound like to have Gray say it, even if that's not a part of the play? I think that would be something that I would find really exciting to do if I was taking your script and just doing some exercises with it. So I wonder, especially as we were talking about realizing that these characters, this is me wrapping up, but when they leave this room, they control the outside. And I didn't realize that before, but it makes a lot of things make a lot more sense to draw that out. So maybe if there was some discussion either in the dialogue or just, amongst your team or the creative team, but what happens when Blue leaves and is suddenly in control? Because that suddenly makes the circumstances of them leaving so much more like, wow, like what happens when Blue leaves and then comes back and then, like, kills himself? I think that was all really interesting to think about. Who are these characters? How do they relate to each other? And then what do they do if they are given individual agency on this writer character? Are all really interesting things that you could do some exercises with your actors. So.
Okay, that's great. I would just, Zaynab, go back being to a certain extent a bit of a traditionalist, and start with Lydia's comments about what is being written and who is the person, because I think if the politics of this person and what they are writing are somehow integrated, so we get a sense that that's what they're trying to write, this quote masterpiece has something to do with their political convictions, and that itself is partially what is blocking it. Like, if I put my politics on the line, will I ever get a job, kind of thing, or ever get a writing gig? So that I really feel you've blown things apart, and there's so much ambiguity that is enticing and is part of the fun, but it would not hurt to let us know what the situation is, what the 24 hours are, what is the the défi that this person has given themselves, so that we're in on the tension of why we need to write something good, and that it's a last chance for this person as a writer, kind of thing. Anyway, so making it a little clearer to us is not necessarily going to take away from the fun of the ambiguity that's in there, and your imaginative structure of this person's brain. So, and I agree with Vishesh. You've got something really wonderful here in terms of where you're going with it, and so we wish you all the best in taking it from here. Do you have anything? Anybody got any last words they want to jump in with, or Zaynab, you? No, obviously, Tisri Dunya's fireworks program is a wonderful thing, and we need it. And in fact, next week we have Laura Flynn's play from Fireworks. We will be discussing that this time, same place, next week. And so I thank you all. Thanks, Quinn. Thanks, Vishesh, Liddy, and Gilda. Thank you very, very much. And thank you, Zaynab, very much for letting us discuss your play. Thank you. Good night,
Great
everybody.
job.